The reason I didn't watch this video whenever I first started playing the game is because I didn't want this video to change the way that I approach the game. But
If I'd done what he'd done, I wouldn't have an issue with the video that he's reacting to. But I do have an issue with it. I just didn't want it to be about just me. But because Asmongold has reacted to this, I feel like it's time for me to react publicly. Because this affected how I played the game when I tried to return to World myself. Because I'd forgotten a lot of how I wanted to play the game. So let's continue.
But there's a lot of people with the Monster Hunter community that think that the Clutch Claw actually ruined the game, and they don't like it. I don't know why. That's why I wanted to see it, but I didn't want to see.
In no small part because this video exists, but there was a lot of sentiment that way anyway.
I didn't want to watch it until I had already played the game.
Most Hunter expansions are designed to add to the base game.
Yeah.
They bring in new content like monsters, locations, as well as new features.
Yeah, sure.
Quality of life improvements that can really make the entire game more pleasant to play through, as well as substantial gameplay additions that affect the combat in a major way,
Logical.
for better or worse. In
Sure.
this video, we will be discussing what is, in
Oh,
my
I did
opinion,
that.
one of the worst gameplay additions. I am talking about Monster Hunter Wild Iceborne's Clutch Claw and how it ruined a perfectly good game.
Really?
Yeah. Like I said, it's a very common sentiment.
It ruined the game.
He's
Monster
actually
Hunter combat
acting
is pretty
surprised.
grounded. You have your weapon,
Yeah.
your items, your abilities, and you have to use them to take down large beasts. In the first
I actually think that's one of the big reasons why Monster Hunter is successful is because it's grounded. It's like the tools that the player has access to are relatively realistic. It's not like you can cast spells and shit.
Stipulation: Monster Hunter World has grounded combat. Let's move ahead.
It's probably, like, in my opinion, I think it is on the same level of grounded as the size of this greatsword. Where it's like, clearly people didn't use really big greatswords like this because they'd probably weigh 400 pounds. However, they used really big swords, and this is just an elevation of it, right? It's like kind of a dramatization of it.
It's close enough, and we can deal with that.
of the slinger that allows you to grab onto monsters. You can use this to either weaken various body parts and make them take more damage, or you can latch onto their head and unload all your slinger ammo into it, causing the monster to go careening into a wall.
Yeah, this is the main tool that I see most people using the slinger for. I think people call it like wall bang or something like that, where
Yes.
you make the monster run into the wall and it gets knocked down in enrage.
Yes.
It expands the use of the slinger greatly, and is even available for people in the base game who purchase Iceborne.
Yeah.
Let's cut to the chase. I think the Clutch Claw is a terrible addition that ruined the entire game.
Wow.
Here's why.
Okay. Alright.
To clutch onto a part of the monster, you first have to aim and press the right base button. With how fast the monsters move, this can be quite difficult, especially when there's a specific part in mind. For example, sometimes I want to clutch onto Brachiosaurus' head, and it will end up on his arm. The aiming is...
I've never had that problem personally. Like, yeah, I mean, for me, I've never had a problem being able to lock on and get onto the part of the monster that I wanted to attack.
I've had medium difficulty, nothing exceptional, nothing terrible, but it is an issue. It's not perfect. The Clutch Claw aiming is just not perfect. Stipulated. We'll move on.
If you are holding onto the car in point A and it accelerates really fast to point B, that will hurt you a lot more than if it hits you at the very end of the acceleration, because it's going to barely tap you, because the acceleration of the beast Barioth is slower.
Yeah, they're talking about Barioth in this section, and Barioth has its issues. I mean, it's one of those monsters that comes from an older version. It has some wonkiness with its hitboxes, and we just have to accept it as it exists, because they didn't make any radical changes, they just adapted it to World. They're not reinventing the wheel completely, they're just changing it a little bit.
While the heavy weapon users are stuck with lengthy animations that are more easily interrupted. There's a clear imbalance.
I mean, isn't that something that's the case with just the nature of a heavy weapon versus a light weapon?
And if the monster attacks during them, you will be thrown off. Light weapons that belong. So you have to be quick about tenderizing and finding an opening to perform your Clutch Claw attack. Each weapon has their own unique attack at varying lengths, and if the monster attacks during them, you will be thrown off. Light weapons like the longsword or sword and shield or light bowgun have quick animations, while the charged blade, greatsword, and other heavy weapons are slower.
Yeah.
The charged blade attack in particular is annoying because you always end up in axe mode, and combined with the speed of its cut attack, it led to me never using the weapon in this game. This means that light weapons have a clear advantage.
This is not true, and he says why just after and pretends that he didn't say what he just finished saying here.
Being able to quickly tenderize in and out, while the heavy weapon users are stuck with lengthy animations that are more easily interrupted. There's a clear imbalance.
I mean, isn't that something that's the case with just the nature of a heavy weapon versus a light weapon? I think
Well,
it is, right? I mean,
it's
like,
that
for example,
too,
Like, you
but
watch a lot of these other videos of people using different weapons, and they just have like such a huge advantage in some cases because those weapons, they can get in like 2 hits.
stipulated, not every Monster Hunter weapon is the same.
Light weapons have to clutch claw attack the same part twice, while heavy weapons can just do it once. Instead of, say, buffing the heavy weapons to be at less of a disadvantage, like giving them faster animations, they instead just nerf the light weapons. With how fast these monsters move, finding multiple opportunities in a short space of time can be very difficult.
I don't think that that's the way that it's intended to be used.
Multiple opportunities in a short span of time, without the monster being, let's say, wall-banged. I mean, there's a big issue here with the expectation.
I think that it's not really intended. The clutch claw, I don't think is really being it's not intended to be used as like a DPS rotational tool. I think that it's being used as like a strategic enabler. I mean,
What he means is that he doesn't think that it's designed to be used solely for speedrunning or solely for maximizing your DPS in a way that's required and therefore should succeed every single time you do it. But as we will see, that's basically the expectation that the maker of the video about the clutch claw ruining Monster Hunter World basically had and basically has spread to others.
It is, but not for direct damage. That's what I mean. Yeah. It's like you're not supposed to like use it in a rotation of your attacks. You're basically supposed to use it to enable your rotation of attacks to do more damage. That's what I've seen in videos. That's what I've seen a lot of other people do. Like, yeah, it's basically a debuff. Yeah, Colossus Smash.
How
Yeah,
annoying
great
it is to
example.
play meta part consistently, it makes tenderizing really fun. Let's discuss another issue, and that's weapon integration. Some weapons have the ability to combo touch claw right after attacks. Take the hammer for instance.
And the hammer is a great example.
Attacking while swinging in. It's fun to do, and allows you more opportunities to clutch.
Yeah, it's cool.
The lance has a particularly good counter that combos for the clutch claw.
This has a lot of hidden weaknesses and disadvantages. And I did Lance an awful lot on PlayStation. Not my Steam account, but on PlayStation. And I've done Lance since Monster Hunter 2 DOS. I basically didn't play the portables because I didn't have access to them. And then I played Monster Hunter World and then Monster Hunter Rise. That counter clutch claw, it's powerful, but it's also something that can easily get you into a lot of trouble and has a lot of weaknesses that aren't easily apparent because a lot of monsters simply don't play into what you're trying to do.
There are no clutch combo attacks. You have to manually stop and aim every time you want to do it, and there's no cool moves to integrate into your clutch.
So your problem is that the single most popular weapon in the entire game doesn't have enough help being number one in yet another area. I don't sympathize with this.
Combos, which makes finding opportunities rather difficult. It makes the clutch claw feel like an afterthought. I mentioned earlier that it was annoying trying to find opportunities to clutch onto a monster without being thrown off.
Okay.
But if you use the temporal or rocksteady mantles, this will not happen, and you'll be able to clutch and attack freely. The issue here is that both tools are only available in World's post-game, so you have to go back to the old content to access them.
I'm not even going to go over Asmongold's response, but this is whining. Iceborne is an expansion. It's not meant as a replacement for World completely. And if you're into Iceborne, your weapons are so overpowered, and this guy will explain why. He will explain the context of that. Going back into the main game and obliterating the proper opponents to get what you need for those tools is relatively trivial.
the lightning circles. I think you can grab onto his arm and clutch claw him at that point.
And this is a point here. Knowledge of the monster will make you much more effective at using the clutch claw. And this is not me saying that I'm the kind of expert who knows every monster in World, because I've been out of practice. I've been returning to World. I'm not at the top of my game, even where I was in PlayStation. I'm certainly not an expert who knows every move that the monster is going to make before it makes it. But if you know more, then you can find the safe times, and obviously, the Clagger is a safe time.
How would I solve this? I think that the way that I think this is what would make it better is that the moment that your clutch claw, like you stop clutch clawing off of the monster, even if you don't activate an attack, it ends the stagger. So if you decide to clutch claw on and then jump off, the stagger immediately ends anyway.
This is discussing the mechanic where you clutch claw on a Claggered monster and then you immediately hop off and go back to your attacks. Why do people do this? Because they're speedrunning. They may not be officially speedrunners, but they're speedrunning. Because that's exactly who I learned about this technique from their videos. And there are some great Japanese ones that I love watching because I spent a lot of time learning the Japanese language. I enjoy Japanese content. But it's basically oriented to beginners and issues a lot of stuff like this, which is really advanced stuff too. Which can be a detriment. But at any rate, the point is that he makes the point this is cheesy. It is cheesy because people are using it as an exploit. And they're free to do so, but they're speedrunning. Even if they're not officially speedrunning, the maker of this video says, I'm not a speedrunner. If you're doing this, you're speedrunning. You may not be doing it in your mind, but you're doing it as a matter of what you are physically up to.
I think that's the only way you could stop something like this from happening, because it does feel kind of cheesy when
it is, which is why people do it. And it's a game, they're free to do it.
The charts displayed show the health of certain monsters in 4 and 4 Ultimate, as well as Rise and Sunbreak. If you're wondering why Rise and Sunbreak are so absurdly high compared to the other game, it's because we have access to stronger and faster abilities in that game, so all that is taken into account. This is also only the solo scaling.
You mean that there's actual game balance going on? What a shock.
4 Ultimate's health pools are also generally lower than average, but are compensated by faster monster speeds and higher attack power. As I'm getting off topic, if you divide the expansion health by the base game health, you can see that Sunbreak multiplied Rise's health by 2.4, and 4 Ultimate multiplied its base game by 1.8, resulting in the numbers you see now.
So Sunbreak is the expansion for Rise, and he's basically going to say that the monsters in Iceborne they have way too much health. Because there is a huge health difference between the monsters in like base world and Iceborne. I've noticed that myself.
Yes, there is.
Up and down respectively.
I remember fighting the first one. I was like, what the fuck?
So let's look at World. These health pools are pretty low across the board.
Yeah.
And that kind of attribute World's
15,000.
I don't know. And if we look at Iceborne's health pools, whoa! A pretty massive increase with
holy shit!
No matter from early. This is the biggest increase of all, being over triple World's health.
Oh?
It's not as big as you think. It's really not. It's mostly an issue for where I am with my Steam account because I stopped playing. I tried some other things. I tried Power for a bit on Xbox Game Pass. But the point is that if you have endgame tools, your hunts are not that much longer, if at all. But if you're stuck pre-Velcana, then you're going to have longer hunts, at least if you're hunting anything that's a significant threat, which is honestly a good thing for a lot of stuff.
Oh my
The
god.
reason for such an increase is that, you see, it allows us to deal much more damage to monsters, and the developers probably realized, oh no, the monsters will die fast like they did in World, so they cranked up the monster's health to compensate. Not only this, but they nerfed monster hit zones so that they take even less damage.
That's actually the bigger issue. To the point that if his video had been confined to the issue of hit zones, I would have been fine with it. But that is not the case.
I mean, is that the only reason why they did it? I don't know if that's the only reason why they did it. Because playing through the baseline game, I don't think there is that many like really hard bosses in Monster Hunter World. Like there's some of them that have like complex and difficult mechanics, but for the most part, I think a lot of them are actually just pretty fucking easy.
I should probably mention the warbands.
Keep in mind that he was using Greatsword, so when he found a way to really hurt the stuff, they got hurt. So it's not like you do a few hits and you've done moderate damage. When he did a few hits, they were big, big numbers.
Like, I'm not sure the way the expansion mechanics work in the other games, but like in Monster Hunter World, like Iceborne is like an entirely different tier of gear. So like whenever you're looking at the health pool increase, you're looking...
They used to call it G rank.
At the health pool increase without taking into account the fact that players are also doing way more damage. Just on a baseline, they are doing way, way, way more damage. So
yes, they are.
Saying, you think so?
2% of the monster's total monster damage. They do massive.
Yeah, because like now that I have all my master rank gear, I don't really feel like there's a big difference between me fighting a high rank Teostra whenever I was high rank and me fighting a master rank type Teostra whenever I'm master rank.
Yeah.
I feel like it's basically the same thing, except for the numbers are bigger.
Great damage, and they knock down the monster on top of that. It's free damage everywhere. You can only do it when the monster is not enraged.
Yeah.
And this means that if you play optimally, monsters spend half the fight on the floor and the other half absolutely furious. Do you see why they increase the health so much now? If you actively...
Yeah, because of agitating. Because with the monsters enraged, if you have a skill that takes advantage of the fact that they're enraged, and then you keep wallbanging them to keep them enraged, then you're doing more damage. And of course you have to play around that they're enraged, but if you can, and then you can stagger them and you can break their parts and all this stuff, flinching, then the monster is going to spend all that time on the ground. And that's how speedrunning works. That's the whole point of speedrunning. It's the whole theory. It's the whole process of speedrunning.
Use the clutch floor the way it's intended, your hunts will last normal lengths. If you refuse to use it though, they can often end up much longer.
Normal lengths. Normal lengths when you just went to great lengths to explain how the hit points for the monsters in base world were low. Unusually low. He's not actually accounting for multiplayer, is he?
You see, the tenderizing and the damage dealt through warbanks adds up, and I find that hunts can take over 25 minutes, which was never the case in the base game. I want to remind you...
Of course not. Well, I mean, that's not completely true, but... Unless it's Lunastra or something at the very end.
Was from touch floor free, and you didn't have to use a slinger. If you did, it gave you an advantage, but not a huge one.
I think, like, for example, against Kushala Dora.
Yeah, Kushala flashpotting her into oblivion. Let's stipulate that it was very, very strong.
I think that, so, for example, this is one thing that I think is really cool about using it, is like whenever you're fighting a monster and it's running away, and you can clutch claw onto it as it's running away, holding onto it while it's running away, and then attack it.
Is it fun? This is a game. Is a mechanic actually fun? And what we're seeing here is somebody doing his darnest to take the fun out of the game. And that's not Asmongold. And I credit him for that.
Most things in the game make sense.
Most.
Like, you know, fire, ice damage, contradict. Yeah, no. So, that's basically one of the big reasons. Like, you hit the head, it knocks them down more often than if you hit their side. You hit their tail a lot, it cuts off their tail. You can use the environment, you can trap the monsters, and...
Our lizard brains understands cutting off a lizard's tail.
Like, you feel like you're in a real environment, rather than just like, let's say, oh, I'm just playing this video game against...
The illusion of realism is exactly what we're going for here. I mean, it's exactly what sets World apart from Rise and from a bunch of other games. And they've done a really good job of that. The environmental stuff is great. Absolutely great.
A slinger burst would make you do a true charge slash faster. Like,
he's explaining that that's a bit cheesy, and that's fine, but again, it's a game. They made an expansion, they made all sorts of stuff that involved these slinger bursts. And that's exactly another point. I think the maker of the video basically reduced the whole clutch claw to tenderize, wallbang, tenderize, and completely ignored the slinger bursts, which are a huge component if you're a light weapon player.
First half of the game received such a huge addition that completely changed the combat like this with the expansion, and it actually made me worried for the future.
That's because most games just had more games. What you had were entirely new game additions. So you didn't have, oh, this is an expansion. It wasn't really like that. It was, you had new game versions because Capcom likes money. So of course, they want people to buy new stuff. And Iceborne was just really joined at the hip with World because they had Rise coming, because they had a completely separate thing going on. So World had its own proper expansion. It is an expansion. It is, you get more of World. You go back to World to do stuff. You go back to fight Kulu Yaku if you want to, if you want the gear. You're not forced to, but you probably want to. A little. So the point is that they're joined together. In the past, you just had new game versions. So it's not simply, oh, this is the only time that we've had a radical change in mechanics. No, they just made new games. And the new games had radical changes in mechanics. They just weren't expansions. That's all it is. And I see in the bottom, I agree, while fun initially, I thought Clutch Claw became a chore. It's because I watched this video and because I heard the talk that I was treating the Clutch Claw as a chore. And when I couldn't do it consistently on certain monsters, I felt like I was playing the game badly. And I became a much better player when I worried about that a lot less. But that is also weapon dependent. And, if you're playing Lance, then you should be counterclawing and tenderizing all the time, because that's one of your biggest advantages. But it's completely the opposite for some other stuff. Anyway.
Or more difficulty. No. My hope was that they wouldn't ruin a perfectly good combat system with a needless addition again. So I've discussed why the Clutch Claw sucked, and how it ruined Iceborne for me.
A greatsword. What do I want to do whenever I play a greatsword? I want to hit things in the head with the greatsword.
Yeah.
So I just don't really use it a lot. Now, it would be better if I did, but unless I have to, I just don't really do it.
A game is really about choice.
Changing the combat flow massively.
I think it's kind of obviously
worse. With Rise, I liked the wirebugs from the beginning, so them feeling mandatory wasn't an issue because I liked using them and I had a good time. If you look at World and Iceborne together as a complete experience, World lies to you by saying you don't actually need the Clutch Claw.
The Clutch Claw simply didn't exist when World started.
Only for Iceborne to pull the rug from underneath. Rise is honest to you about the wirebugs from the very beginning.
I don't agree with this. I don't agree with this point because I think that as a game comes out and there's more tools in the game.
And also it ignores that they did push the slinger, and saying that the slinger is optional, I mean sort of kind of. It's like the tracking bugs being optional. They're really not. You use them to some degree, but it's trying too hard. He needs the narrative to function, so he's bending some things to fit the narrative. I mean, the original video game.
And I think that there are games that are in the past have had something like this happen before.
Furthermore, I don't think the main service team should try these huge experimental additions. They should focus on making raw, grounded combat
power creep basically
gimmicks,
yeah,
while incorporating the best parts of the portable team's experimentation.
You mean that Wild should be its own game and not an expansion? Yeah, that's fair.
I don't have a frame of reference to talk about that, really. I mean, because I've only played one game.
Well, I've played Monster Hunter 2 DOS. I've played 3 Try. It's Monster Hunter Try, which is Monster Hunter 3. I didn't play the portables, but that's not really the point. It's not really the point.
Adding in something during the expansion that's available for the whole game.
If you do accept the Clutch Claw in my underwater combat video, where I compared 2 bad mechanics with each other, some commenters were curious as to why it was bad, and I've wanted to talk about this in detail for a while now, particularly why the wirebugs are better. I'm sure some of you might suggest trying.
I don't mind if you think the wired bugs are better. I don't mind at all. The issue I have is with treating tenderizing as absolutely mandatory to the point that if you can't tenderize a monster that you're doing it wrong. There's a reason the clagger exists, because you can play normally and then take advantage of an opening without actively hunting to tenderize at points where you don't have an opening. The point being that if it worked every time you did it, then it would be completely meaningless. So you shouldn't use it in the middle of the monster's attack combos. You should use it at the end of one, perhaps, if you know that one is actually going to end and stay ended for a little while. But if you don't know that, if you haven't learned that yet, the point is that you shouldn't feel safe doing it every single time. You shouldn't have an expectation of success every single time. You shouldn't see it as, my DPS will suffer unless I succeed with it every single time, because then you are a speedrunner. And people shouldn't speedrun unless they're trying to speedrun. If people are just trying to play the game, they shouldn't have to feel like this is mandatory, because it's not mandatory to hunt for the tenderize above hunting the monster, which is what I fell into doing because of videos like this, and because of sentiment in the community and me having forgotten how I was playing when I was playing on PlayStation when I tried to come back to World and join the player base on Steam. So that's why I had an issue with this video, not with Asmongold's reaction. I think his reactions are very sane, and he's played the game a lot. He's played it later than I have, but the point being is that he's a hardcore gamer, and he gets that there's a lot about the Clutch Claw which was not as offensive as people treated it when they regarded the gameplay as a chore, because they made it a chore by choice, by conscious effort. And if you just do it more like follow the path of least resistance, flow like water, find the places where you can take advantage of the monster rather than the monster taking advantage of you, if you do that, then it's not going to feel like a chore anymore. It'll feel like a fight. It'll feel like a game again. But if you keep this mindset that it's mandatory, that you have to do it, then you're going to hate this game. Which is what I think actually happened.
Out the Iceborne Community Edition mod, since it reportedly does rebalance the Clutch Claw to be something of a bonus rather than mandatory.
So it's come down to modding it in order to change a core aspect of the gameplay experience, which is as much the product as anything else you can possibly think of in Monster Hunter, and say that, well, I like some of your game, but I don't like all of it, so I'm going to just mod it. And I understand where this is coming from, but I think it's a cop-out. I think it's surrendering to having made it a chore while saying, I'm not a speedrunner, but you actually are. Because you're one in your heart. Because you've turned it into getting your hunt times down. And getting them down to the point where, should they be as low as they were in base world? Because that HP was just low. So, I don't get it. I don't get why you would want to reduce everything to where you're doing, 5-minute hunts. That doesn't have to be the case.
At the moment, I'm not really interested, but maybe in the future. That'll be all for today. I hope you...
Well, that's fine. So I'm just gonna say that I just wanted to take this opportunity to respond to the whole theory behind it, because, like I said, it was just about they changed the hit zones a lot. They made it difficult to damage the monster as much as you'd want to unless you tenderize, and the HP shifting has been very different from Rise, and I like wire bugs more. Those are valid points. It's just that I'm saying that it does not follow that this was mandatory to the point that its presence, its mere existence, actually ruined the game. Because I unruined the game by just stopping to worry about the Clutch Claw and worry more about Slinger bursts, because that were The bursts were a lot more key to the weapon I was using, sword and shield, that I was using most of the time, than anything about clutch claw. I got plenty of clutch claws in, I got plenty of wall bangs in, but I wasn't a slave to its existence. I was taking advantage of the slinger burst like I should have from the beginning. But I didn't because I was too worried about tenderizing, and without the Shaver Gem, which you can't get unless you beat Velkhana, or the Shaver Charm, which makes it so that you can't use a different charm. Unless you do those things, radical steps, you don't feel like you're able to use it properly as a light weapon because it takes 2 tenderizes of the same part, and not all monsters are very, they're touchy-feely. They don't like being touched like that. So they resist it. They make it difficult. So the point being is that once I focused on flinches, once I focused on staggers, once I focused on creating openings so that I could do stuff, the clutch claw opportunities opened up on their own like they're supposed to. And when I worried less about tenderizing as the opening of every engagement, I had fun again. And that's the important thing. You can have fun. And if you're not having fun, then it's a job, not a game anymore. And that's a terrible place to be. And that's why I keep saying, take care, have fun. Because gaming is about fun, and we must keep it that way. And if it takes a little work to, if it takes not being optimized, so that we have fun, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth keeping games as games. Not that I don't see where this is coming from, but I just can't agree with the conclusion that the clutch claw literally ruined Iceborne. I just don't agree. Anyway, that's my take. That's my battle reacts. This is Off to Battle signing off. Take care, have fun.